Hi everyone, Mel Gabby here, and I do apologise for the lighting. This is part two. I've just done some of the oracle cards. If someone comes on and they want me to read an oracle card, I will do so if you leave me a question. So this is oracle card travel and simple life, and I'm just looking up who I want to mention in this recording. Who I watch on, is it functional? Melancholic, yes. Okay. So I've been watching Simple Life, yeah. So I'll do the travel in a moment. So basically, if you've been watching my YouTube videos for a while, I haven't done many lives. So look, the red's just really annoying. um, so I haven't done many lives on YouTube, and I wanted to start doing some live oracle sessions and some Q&As, around the different things that I cover. And if you are a member of my YouTube page, you'll know that I've been doing podcasts where I interview people. I've been doing reflections where I talk about something that's come up for me that I've discovered. And then more recently, I started the oracle sessions. So the other aspect of this is I've been doing the travel, and the travel was based around my camper van. And if you've been keeping track on Substack or YouTube, you'll know that the camper van still isn't fixed, and I don't know who's going to fix it and what part it needs next. So that's a little bit annoying, I have to say. So I decided I got offered the possibility of looking after a couple of houses, which I did in April, and then now I'm doing the same thing I thought I was going to Devon, but I'm not. I'm in Somerset. So I'm not far from Minehead, and I'm using this time in between seeing clients to write more. So I've got some work over on Substack where I've been writing the Devon diaries, the Kent diaries, the home diaries, and now the Somerset diaries. I write other things on there. So if you're interested to find out more about the writing, then do check out my Substack. Everything's in my name, Melanie Gabby. And I've got the community over on Patreon where all my diaries and lots of travel also goes on there. And I was deliberating on whether or not to do some lives on here. And on YouTube, I've been uploading the oracle sessions because, as I said in previous videos, I've been using oracle cards and tarot on and off for a number of years just for myself, and studying the sort of mystic side of things, the esoteric, and listening. I listen to a lot of spiritual and psychology videos because I like to balance academia, research, philosophy along with the mystical side of things. But also what's made me think of some of the videos that have been coming out a lot over the last 6 months. And I listen to the functional melancholic a lot. I love his stuff because he talks about different philosophers in their perception of life, different facets of life, and then he gives his take on it. And although his background is better than mine, he's got some really nice lighting. But he's just being himself, being authentic, and sharing his perspective. So do check him out because his videos are really good, and they're long form if you like long form. But it's really about looking at those different perspectives, and that's what I've been doing more on this trip. I wasn't quite sure what I was sort of writing about the other day as part of my Substack was before I'd agreed to spend some time here, and it's beautiful. The house is lovely. They've got a most beautiful garden. There are birds flying in and out to the bird feeder all the time. They've got fish. And I've sat in different places in the garden depending on where the shade is because it's been so hot. And it's a bit sad now because it's starting to go dark and it's only 10 to 9. But I wasn't sure how I felt about this trip and how I might use the time. But I thought, actually, even on a more similar to when I went to Wales and Scotland, it can be more like a pilgrimage where you get somewhere and space opens up and you're just looking after yourself, and I've been bringing stuff from the garden that they grow and turning it into nice pasta dishes and just really enjoying that space, seeing clients, sitting in the sun, listening to the birds. But I kind of also, I watch a lot of people who do travel shows as well, and who am I watching at the moment? I've got to give you his name because he's hilarious. He does really good travel videos, and where is he? That's it, Phil Carr. So I was watching him. He went to what's it called, Machu Picchu? Probably pronouncing it wrong. He went there in the video that I was watching. Oh my goodness, it was such a good video. And he goes right in. The hotels he stayed in were beautiful. They had an organised train ride. I don't know if it's normal for anyone that does that trip or it was on top of the package sort of thing. But he does really good travel videos, and he, my goodness, how many steps there were on the way up, to the different mountains where they were going exploring with other tourists. So his videos are really good. He shows the food, the hotel, he tracks, he talks about the transport, and he's funny as well. He makes fairly regular sarcastic comments as well. So I've been watching him, and then I've been watching people like the Functional Melancholic, and I listen to, oh God, I've just accidentally tapped. Oh no, that's who I was listening to this morning. The Great Simplification. Let me put him on pause. Where he checks out philosophy and has guests on there. So where am I going with this? And I guess I've been reflecting on where do I take what I do next? Because things have evolved a fair bit in the last 3 years. Up until 2023, I sort of had a regular project, and was traveling around the country, spending a lot of time in Kent. And when all that came to an end, as I said on other videos, I was really exhausted, and I thought I'll have a month or 3 out. I was able to take some time off, and but I didn't go back to doing what I was doing, and I did go for some of the work that was being offered, had some interviews, and was just really struggling with picking up what would have been a huge amount of work at the time. So I carried on taking time off and then started working again one-to-one with people. So the last 3 years has evolved in a way that wasn't really planned. Like I said, I thought I was going to have a short amount of time off and then maybe get back to doing what I was doing. And most of what I did was overseeing the delivery of services and clinical teams, getting things working better. And then for anyone, that gets in their 50s, especially when you've been doing an NHS or local authority job for a long time, your whole identity is based really about the role and what you deliver, what you do, how you work with people. All your time is spent on up leveling your knowledge and your skills and the new information and research that comes out. So it actually starts to form a rather large part of your identity. And even if you start dreaming, as many people do, say to me, I just want to get a job in a coffee shop and have a simple life or work for B&Q. And I've had those conversations recently as well. It's like, really, would you, and in many cases people do. But at the same time, the real shift is what everything in that part of your life meant. And so when I left, like I said, I didn't leave thinking, that's it, I'm finished, I'm going to retire, or I'm going to go off and work in a garden centre. I left with this idea that I was kind of convincing myself that I just needed a break and some time off. and maybe I'll get another project, because the project I was on, it came to its natural project end, sadly, because it could have continued to be funded. It should have been funded. I could have left it in hands, it shouldn't have closed. So I had that sort of mindset, and in 23, it was really about sort of recovery, really, from lots of things, and having that time out. But I did find it quite difficult. And then I started to work again as a therapist and working one to one, doing coaching therapy. I had a coaching group, a small group of women. And just after, well, during COVID, because I trained as a yoga and meditation teacher in 2019, I was teaching online. So since 2020 till about 23, I was running the coaching group, teaching online, and I had this project. And some of that continued after I finished that last job. But the whole thing really is about reflecting on what you've done in life and what's mattered and what you've given time and energy to, whether that's also your job and your children, if you've had children, or supporting family, because lots of people, when they get in their 50s, are starting to also become carers for elderly parents. And I've got a few friends who are in that position. So there are shifts that occur regardless of whether you're choosing to think about them or not. But they can be under the surface, bubbling away, drawing your attention to it from time to time, as mine did. And so this concept of, who am I when I'm not that role, when I'm not that profession, when I'm not that nurse, that teacher, the doctor, I'm not getting my fulfillment or even my day-to-day existence from the role that I'm doing. Who am I? So you don't automatically, when you're transitioning into something slightly different, really start to question that. But I'd kind of started being aware of that from about 2016, when I started questioning whether or not that was something I was going to continue doing. Oh, I'm going to check my mic. Yes, it is working. So 2023 was a sort of weird year in a way, and I just started to pick up some work. And 24 was when I got my camper van. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is I mentally had made a decision that it was experimental. I was going to try out what it was like to teach at festivals. I was going to have some stands at some events and talk to people and see what that was like. I wanted to see that the different things that I did, whether or not I enjoyed it. I wanted to enjoy what I was doing, because when you get to burnout and you've given a lot of energy and time to everything that you've been doing, sometimes you haven't got that much left to give. And so it became important that what I signed up to was something I was going to enjoy. So I got the camper van, and so that's when my interest in making more videos started, because I enjoy filming, taking pictures. I used to send them to friends. Hey, look, look at this beautiful beach, this seaside. Post them up on the platforms. I had a little photography website. So I was kind of dabbling in photography. Then I started dabbling in making little videos, and I was enjoying that. And I started going to the festivals, and teaching live was like being reignited. I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed meeting the people and having the conversations around well-being and the things that they were struggling with. So sometimes we don't know, when we take that step out there, whether or not it's going to turn into something or it's part of the process. And so I was doing those various things, meanwhile playing with the oracle cards and the tarot, and traveled around in the camper van and started filming those different places that I went to. So of course my YouTube channel, I've been uploading the travel videos, the podcasts, and then more recently the oracle sessions. But fundamentally it's because I wanted to convey that my life and what I was producing and the message I was giving to other people was about the life that I wanted to create it and what I eventually started calling the soul-led life. And I've wrote over 22 different blogs on Patreon, and are being released on Substack about the idea of how I started to create a soul-led life. And many people are on that path. And part of that process was also of grieving the old aspects of myself and what I was no longer potentially going back to, but I wasn't completely clear what that would be. So in my mind, I decided my intention was to experiment, to go out in the camper van, to do the filming, to meet people, to have these experiences. And it was only towards the end of, so I did longer trips last year. And going to Wales really did feel like a pilgrimage. There was so much that went on in Wales because I started to dive deeper into the history of each area that I turned up in my van. And when I went to South Wales, it was every area that, the moment I got off the bridge, I'd go and visit, and I would go and explore the history of what it was like for people back then, and the work and life for people of all classes. Where was the money in the land, and what had happened with religion and old folklore, visiting the churches. So that was more of a pilgrimage. And so the 2 years was really just about experiencing that. But I was also aware that I was developing cataracts, and that at some stage they may get in the way of me being able to even drive far, at least, especially in the dark. As we get older, the lights seem more glaring. So it felt like that's what I needed to do for those 2 years. And that was the only direction I had. And I was lucky that I was able to fund that from some of the savings that I'd got. So I think in one sense, I was hoping that the travel was going to continue in the way that it did. But I was also aware that how exhausting it is to drive all the time. And, I never want to share things and give the impression that everything is glamorous, that you can meet people I know people who've traveled around the world with their job. They've been musicians, famous people. They've traveled around the world and they've had lots of good times, but they've also experienced fatigue, eating out of hotels, constantly changing, living most of their life in airports. So there's an upside and downside to lots of things, and it can be great for a while, and it's a great opportunity. And I'm just checking because it doesn't look like the other live stream. No, it looks like it's on. Share your link. Let me share that. Copy text. So I'll add that anyway for when people come on, if they come on live. That's not working. I don't know why. Welcome to chat. I got distracted. So yes, the idea was that I might carry on in camper van, but of course the camper van started to have problems, as I've talked about in other videos. And by October, had broken down completely. And so at that time, I was oscillating between hope that I might get back on the road, but it was winter. And I decided that that was the time to go through everything that I'd wrote and recorded and review and change and swap things about, and really took a deep dive into that. So then by February, I thought, it doesn't look like the van is really, it's not looking like it's any better than what it was a few months earlier. And then that's when I was invited to do House It in April. And I thought, that's great. And also that met the need of staying in a location that I liked, being near the sea, being in nature. And I just really got, and I talked about this on my video this afternoon, about nudges and being ignited. And I just got a inspiration to create a Substack platform. And I hadn't planned to start writing, but because I was in Devon, I thought, And this is where the sort of conversation was meaning to go, which was, you know, do I start to document my very ordinary, boring life? And I was telling a friend about this, and she said, "Your life's not ordinary and boring." I said, "It is because, well, not because, but the way I view it is, I go to, like most people with a camper van, you drive to a place, you stay on a campsite, you might film the local area. Some people do a narration over that, talk about the town. I dive into a bit of the history. I'm on the road. It's lovely. But some days it pours down, you're cold, damp, you can't find anywhere to park, or you get fed up, or you're tired. And other days, like when I was in Wales, the weather was really good actually for that time period. And so there were lots of really good moments, but lots of moments where I was so tired one day that I was reversing and I smashed my backlight. And I was like, oh my goodness. And then another time, I think I was going over a hill and it was so bumpy that it ripped off the corner of the bumper. And I was in Wales. I wasn't near any other mechanics or anything. So having a camper van comes with a warning label, like what you get on medicine, really. And especially if you're on your own and you're trying to, navigate that, and you've got to make sure that you stock up the fridge in case you are tired and you want to pull over. So I'd been saying, but apart from that and working with clients, and yes, I've been involved in academia and stuff like that, but my life is quite ordinary, that when I'm home, my son works at home sometimes and now he's got a new job, he goes into work, and I've got that time at home. It's quiet. I don't see that many people. I do like a lot of time on my own. I might walk to the coffee shop or ride on my bike, which I did a lot in the winter because I didn't have the car at that stage. I just had the van. And I thought, taking pictures and walking around and having conversations about what. But that's, and I've just done the oracle cards, and that's authentically me, that is the life I'm living. And now that I'm on my kind of, third house sit, because I spent time in Glastonbury as well in April, I'm much clearer now of what I need. I love the travel. I love meeting people and having random conversations. And I love trying new things, but I also like and need and want to have days of doing nothing. And this trip, I'm near the sea and I love the sea. And I went out to Minehead the other day. I've got my bike in the car. It just about fits in. It's a small car. And I just about probably got a couple of centimeters to play with. Managed to get my electric bike in the car so I could bring it. And when I get to, because it's really hilly around here, but when I then get to the coast where it's flatter on the bays, I can get out on my bike and ride around. And I did that. I was so looking forward to doing that the other day. And it's very simple. It's like the simple, and that's why I've started calling the videos. They're simple. It's simple days, simple life. And not much is happening. But while I'm on the bike, I'm watching the kids playing on the beach. I'm watching the dogs have fun. I'm sometimes having random conversations, so I write about those on Substack. And I rode all the way down to the other end of the beach where Butlins is, and watched everyone on the beach, and then went into town and sat in Costa, had a coffee, wrote in my journal, and the sun was out, and it was just glorious. I was just in joy, just enjoying that moment. And yet it's interesting that I question the value of ordinary life, because there was a time, this has just come to me. There was a time after the birth of my son where I was very depressed, and I'm talking about crying every day. And I felt anxious, stressed. I'd moved into my mother-in-law's. I think there was a bus. I wasn't driving. Everyone went back to work, and I just struggled as a mum. I hadn't grown up really around children. My mum used to look after kids when I was smaller, but I didn't feel very confident, and just moved in with my mother-in-law's, and then I had the baby. And every day, I remember saying to myself that every day I felt depressed and emotional. And I can feel that now. I'm quite surprised actually. I can feel that coming up for me. Because why do we question? Like I'm questioning now, why do we question the simplicity and the ordinary life and the joy and the peace when that wasn't there at one time? And that experience, and it wasn't like I just woke up depressed, but it was like the floodgates opened. And I remember 4 or 5 days in a row of just feeling emotional. I wanted to close the door, close the curtains, and go to sleep and stay under the cover. And the only thing that got me up is I had to feed and look after my son at the time and care for him. And it was really difficult. And the people that I was living with didn't understand depression. I mean, I didn't really understand it. Well, I kind of did because my mum was chronically depressed when I was growing up. So I kind of knew what depression was. But I didn't really, you know, people would just say it was baby blues. And I went to see the doctor and he gave me some antidepressants. And I took them for a little bit, but they just made me feel totally spaced out. So I stopped taking them. And what I realized was the best thing for me at that time was to um, go back to work. So I was about 8 months, not 8 months pregnant. He was about 8 months old, and I decided to to try and get a job. And I didn't want to go back to doing what I was doing. But the idea is that I was just stuck in this house in a village with no bus and no car and a baby and nothing and myself. And all joy of all the things that I used to do had just drained out of me. And now it makes complete sense. You know, I was also, I'd married a British Asian. And so I was also going through culture shock, the expectations that families have on you when you have a baby and, you get married and you go to weddings, you go to your own wedding, the expectations of family around you and the pressure was immense. And I just, I'm quite a strong personality, and to I struggled to navigate it all because at the time the pressure was coming from all directions. It wasn't just one person. And so the thing that I knew where I got probably a sense of self and identity from was through work. And the first job, my mate got me a job at the airport in one of those bureaus when everybody used to have different money, like lira and pesetas and all of that. And I had to leave it. Had to leave it after a few months because I was counting. I come back on the bus and I'd be on 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 5, 10, 50. It was, it was literally driving myself mad. And so I got a job, and that's when I got a job at the courier company. And I really enjoyed it. It was 5 days a week. It was full time. My mother-in-law wanted to be there for the baby. She wanted to give up work, so we swapped. And I started working, but I was still struggling with the depression. And But I remember starting to notice that I was crying less and being less. And when I was going to work, I wasn't too bad. I just felt this sort of heavy misery that used to hang over me, but that wasn't unfamiliar. And then I'd get into work, and sometimes it was too challenging, and I would, I feel that I would get too emotional, and then and that started to reduce, and I started to notice that, and then I started going to the gym because I put on a lot of weight when I was pregnant, and I went to the gym, and I was going like 3 or 4 times a week, and I started to lose weight, and then just started to pick up, and then within 2.5 years, got pregnant with my second boy, and I said, I need to move out. We need to get our own place because the environment is much bigger than we realize. Me and my husband were fine. We got on, and so we did. And then there was a change, and the midwife came out at that time to say, "How you doing?" They were doing these depression inventory forms back then, just to see how you were coping as a new mother. And I said, "No, I'm all right. I'm not depressed." She said, "How do you know?" And I said, "I can open my windows. I can leave the house." It was just, I had a bit of blues, but nothing like what I'd experienced before. And so I have this struggle on and off still because I'm so used to, up until 3 years ago, even though I'd had jobs, the job previous in 2020 was 3 days a week. I'd got it down to from 5 to 4 to 3 by 2020. And then when I picked up this project, it was very little work, and then it expanded rapidly. So I was on two projects. I was running a new program for people on the waiting list for autism and ADHD diagnosis. So we created a pathway across Hampshire, and so I was very heavily involved in them, and they were very important, and I cared about them. Um, but you just get to a phase in your life where you just know that your job sucks the life out of everything else if you want to do other things. And I'd started to experience doing other things because I started to drive around again when my son went to uni, going to visit him, staying by the coast, and I loved it, and it reignited the joy that I had about travel, which is what I did before I came to London. And so the wrangle that I'm talking about is how, and it's not a huge wrangle, but I've just had days since I've been here where I just want to lie and listen to the birds. And I've got a couple of clients, and they're reminding me of some things I forgot, because one client is literally saying something I remember saying to myself when the kids were small and I was working full time, and I didn't get a minute to myself. And I was so exhausted at night, I just used to flake out on the sofa. And I remember thinking, I want to go somewhere and just lie in a dark room. And at one stage, I did book a hotel in the Beaver and sleep late, get up, walk on the beach, sleep late. But I was exhausted, and that's all I needed at that stage. But that's how bad it got before I was able to sort of have a break, because when you're bringing up the kids and working full time, it takes a toll. And some of my clients are going through those experiences now. So, when I first came to Devon and I went to Exeter and I explored the history about the Romans' time there and what they created and the philosophy and what it meant to be a citizen, and going to explore the art gallery and the museum, spending time at the cathedral, riding my bike down the river. And it was all really great because I had the time and the freedom to be able to go and explore. And the same going to Glastonbury, I booked a place, I went there for 4 days, met people there, and they became the inspiration for the things that I was writing. And then the second house sit was at Teignmouth, and I got a beautiful place, but it was up a bit of a hill, so I couldn't get my bike out. It was way too steep. to ride down to town. Well, I could have rode down to town, but I don't know if the brakes would have worked at that speed. And so the writing started to evolve. And when you write, you need more stillness. You need more time to be able to just be in that space, especially if you're writing stream of consciousness, and which means you just write what comes to you. And it's taken so long for me to be able to articulate what it is I'm reflecting on. And I still struggle with that sometimes. So writing a stream of consciousness, then shaping it up, and then it becoming something. And I started posting it on Substack. And even then I was like, I'm not really doing that much. But that's when the architecture series on Substack was born. When I started writing about the history that I was coming across, what I was seeing, the Devon Diaries, my experience in Glastonbury, some of the people that I came into contact with, and even some of the really random conversations. I wrote a Substack about, do posh people go to service stations? Because I've been reading. I was at the Grayson Perry exhibition in Exeter, and he had these wall hangings that were, the weaved ones, and they depicted something. I think someone else had done the wall hanging, but he'd drawn the picture and they'd turned it into the hanging. And it depicted different scenes I think it based on the 80s. So they had this couple who were holding a glass of red wine, and the guy just looked like he hadn't had sleep in 3 years, and his wife was stood there very stoic. And then they had this couple who looked fairly bohemian, wafting down the road, pushing a pushchair, with a cortina in the background, and Harry and Sally on the fluffy dice. And it was fascinating because it depicted a lot of what I saw in the 80s, cortinas, fluffy dice, Harry and Sally, and the occasional family that, it was very unusual to drink wine back then. But that ignited me, and that added to the writing. And of course, like I said, that sometimes we need to create the stillness and the space in order to reconnect with ourselves and to create. So if you listen to, I think it's Rick Rubin, who spends a lot of time creating, but a lot of time in stillness and mindfulness. And so I've been acutely aware that I've been grieving the fact that the van is still in this place of maybe it won't ever get fixed, or it will. I don't know. Of grieving that period of time that was very meaningful, and the experimentation of transitioning into a new way of being, which only was this year of, because I tried out the yoga teacher, tried out the speaking at events, and then only this year, 2026, I wasn't as interested in moving about so fast. I wanted a slower pace. And there seems to be maybe it's just the algorithm that's throwing these videos up for me to watch. There seems to be a phase of people saying, we want things that are more simple, a simple life. And that will mean different things to different people. But as I was saying earlier about identity, it takes a while to shed the facets of who we've been. And in the last few years, I've been several different people. I've been a teacher, facilitator, project designer, speaker, podcast host. I've done several different things, therapist, researcher. And that's been evolving. And in that process of reviewing what felt good, what do I enjoy doing, what do I want to invest the energy in? And this is a process that many of us can go through. I think even 20 and 30-year-olds are probably going through some of this now. There is a piece of research that talks about the midlife crises that 30-year-olds are experiencing, because they're asking questions that we didn't ever have the time or the awareness to ask. If you're in your 50s now, we wouldn't have been asking those questions years ago, unless you'd had a trip in a field and connected with your soul and your sense of spirituality, because this is how it all started to really expand and evolve in the 60s with this sort of enlightenment era. And we're asking that question of, who are we? Who have we become? Who have we been for the last few years? Am I happy in that identity, in that role, in that way of being? And who am I becoming? And it might not be said as, who am I becoming? It might be, what next? Or there might be some fear and panic. What does it mean? Where am I going? What's life going to look like? And if you've always done what you've always done, and you've got the same friends and they all know you from that, then that can create existential angst. Existential angst is like, who am I? Why am I here? What's the meaning and purpose? And as you get older, you start being close. You're close to people. You were losing people as well, and you start to realise that death is close around the corner, or at least your pension is. Or the research about how long you get your pension before your time on earth is completed. So while I'm talking and processing and saying, isn't it interesting that even after working for 40 years, that I'm asking myself why I struggle to just sit and listen to the birds all day, and why I feel like I've got to do something with the time. Because sometimes it feels like the writing, the therapy work, the videos that I make aren't enough. And I know the pattern, I know where it comes from. And this is the way our brain works, because when we enter into a void, a place that feels uncertain, that's when our old patterns are more likely to reignite. And I was talking to clients about that this week. They're noticing that when they don't get enough sleep, or they put too much output, that the anxiety, old patterns, and depressive thoughts land. And it's been fascinating to notice that. And I kind of noticed that in myself. But, my reason for my original depression was, the sort of nature of the depressive environment I grew up in, and how depression is to depress what we feel and what we think. And we give it no life form. We give it no voice. We aren't able to express ourselves fully. Just like the authentic card I pulled earlier. So it's not easy to just become authentic. We can have times when we become more authentic, but we can have so many fears and anxieties holding us back. So it's a kind of long around way of saying, like with the functional melancholic, I probably tuned into him because I thought, functional melancholic. We don't hear the word functional much. It's quite a clinical term, functional melancholic. And I thought, oh, that kind of fits me to some degree, because sometimes I would feel very melancholic, joyless, not in peace, just meh. And yet I'm noticing, especially in this beautiful space, that it's been joy and peace in the simplicity of doing nothing. And I still have that part of me that says, go out and record, go on your bike, be entertaining. Because I've still only got maybe 20 visitors on some of my videos. And I watched this other guy who was talking about the trap on YouTube, that you can start feeling like that you're talking into a void, and not appreciate that even if one person has heard something that you've said and it's been meaningful to them, that in itself is of value. Because we're geared to believe that unless we've got 5,000 followers or 72,000 people who are tuning in, Um, well, YouTube will tell you that because you've got to get 5,000 hours. I think it's hours, or is it likes? People. I think it's 5,000 hours before you'll even get monetized. And then there's some other hoop you have to jump through. And I thought, I've never been like that in my career. I've never liked jumping hoops just for the sake of someone saying that if you don't do X, you won't get X result. And that's the danger of signing up to something and believing that you need to perform in some way. And performing is the opposite of authenticity in a way, unless you are naturally performing in your flow, like the ballet dancer on the card that I had earlier. Um, and so there's a part of me that says, no, because I'm not about performance. I've just found a medium like writing to share some of what I think. And I've had to slow down to try and make sense of what it is that I want to convey and say that may resonate with someone. Because I've always been motivated to say, even in your darkest hours, there will be light. Even when you think you're alone, someone is there with you, whether that is spirit, God, or your best mates thinking about you, or the candle that you light. Even in your darkest hours, there is light. And that time period of when I felt so depressed and can't even think of the words, just, I remember thinking, if I've got to feel like this for the rest of my life, oh my God. And that's when I made a decision that I would try as much as I could, different things, to reduce the experience of feeling depressed. But joy and peace weren't within my grasp. I wasn't feeling peace. I was agitated. I was stressed, depressed. My self esteem had rock bottomed. And I had to find a new way of creating my sense of self. And our sense of self changes, our identity changes, and who we are as human changes. And if we can get lulled into a false sense of security, when something feels safe and we're grounded and it means something for a certain amount of time. And the hardest thing sometimes is being able to let that thing go, especially if we derive our sense of purpose and validation external from us. That we reach out and we need other people to tell us how great we are, how well we're doing at something, what a great mum, what a great worker we are. But deep down, we feel like we're a fraud. And I didn't feel that as my work continued because I knew I was good at what I did and I was making a difference. Our service was making a difference. I had some great staff. But it took time. That process for me took time, as it does for other people that I work with. I can meet with someone and say, let's do 6 sessions together and see where you're at, what's going on, what would give you the best respite or result at the moment. But is that long-term change? Not necessarily. In many cases, it isn't. And I was chatting to a client today because she is going to be in the clinical field, but a different job, and is struggling because her mum sounds like has got some very narcissistic traits, but also trauma, I think. And so the people in the family have all adapted to the role that they needed to have. And her being a girl, she's become the people pleaser that try and alleviates the distress that her mum's got, so her mum doesn't lose her shit basically. And has lived with that for years, but then became an adult, went to university, started studying in the clinical field, and is still caught up in that young part of herself that wants her mum to be like the mum that her friends had. Why isn't she like that? Why isn't she more like that? And she said to me today that sometimes her mum is different and she's okay and she's not how she is. She said, but I don't know if she's changed or if it's more manipulative. So I said to her, and this is one of the things that comes through a lot of the clinical conversations around women who've been in relationships with a partner who they believe, we can't diagnose, who they believe is narcissistic, is a narcissist, or even further psychopathological issues. And I said to her, okay, because she's in the clinical field, I could have this conversation. I said, number one, you're still hoping, like that young girl, that she's going to be the mom that she should be, that you want her to be, that is good enough parenting type of mom, that shows love, helps validate your feelings, your experience, looks out for you, has got your back, fixes your lunchbox, all of that. And that hasn't been there. So that constant seeking of that need, I said, sets you up for the cycle of disappointment, because you think it's going okay and you've made some impact, and then the same cycle occurs and you're disappointed and upset. So you want her to change. So I said, but what does that mean? What does change mean? How do we validate change? So I gave her example that when I was working in the clinical field, change was something that was measured to prove, especially in therapy. The most researched therapy is CBT in the UK. And so in order to get the funding from the health boards into all the areas, to pay the clinical staff to meet with people day to day, to offer them therapy, they would use measures. And the measures measure particular things. But the overarching idea is if that person gets 6 to 12 sessions, that they will change, and then they changed it from change to improve. So I said to her, so you've got to know what you're measuring. Are you measuring someone's less depressed and happier, less anxious and more courage, not self-harming anymore, not suicidal anymore? And there is a different measure for there's a measure for depression, there's a measure for anxiety, and there's a general measure, there's a level of concern measure. So I said, on a very rudimentary level, I could say to you, if you came to see me, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 feeling amazing and 0 feeling terrible, your subjective experience is, what number are you? And we have to be mindful that we capture that today, the way that you're feeling today. So you might say to me, actually, I'm a 5. Okay. Are you ever higher than that? Yeah. Okay. Then we can explore what's going on. What is it that's going on in your world that moves you higher than a 5? And what knocks you down? And they might not be aware of that. And so that might be the first piece of work. And if they said they were depressed or anxious, and one of the agencies I also work for might get you to fill out a form, and it shows how severe, mild, moderate, or severe. And if it's severe, normally you'd be seen by higher level services that have got clinical psychologists. But if it's reactive, you've just lost a parent, lost a job, going through a divorce, then of course your depression is natural. And sometimes we need to give people time to talk about that and move through it. But in terms of measuring change, and whether your input, as in my input with my clients, and my client's input with her mum, that every time she shares something that she thinks enlightens her about how she could do it differently or believe something differently, she's hoping that that insight, that information, this happens all the time in narcissistic relationships. The partner tries to teach or inform the partner. If you saw it this way, or if we communicated this way, if you asked me this, it would improve this in such and such way. But I said to her, you don't know, because I don't know her. I can't figure that out. Whether or not she is if your partner or your parent is on the psychopathological scale, we don't know whether or not they are intentionally behaving as they are because they can, and how conscious of that they are, or whether or not they are emotionally dysregulated and have never learnt to heal or haven't healed their trauma and are still emotionally dysregulated. So therefore, they're lashing out, and how much insight that they can get, because a full mind can also create cognitive distortion. So, what message am I trying to give the woman that I'm working with is we can put energy and effort, and this is what happens in toxic relationships, energy and effort into saying, look, when you get wound up and angry, have you thought about, or you listen to them, or you try and adapt or make something different. And in the end, you can end up adapting yourself out the back door, doing a shimmy, because nothing's good enough and nothing works. Or do you withdraw the time, energy, and attention and just start observing what's going on? Because you don't know whether it's on purpose, it's manipulative, or it's just, poor adaptive coping mechanisms. And either way, there's no excuse for treating people badly around you, even though we still have off days. So I said to her, so as a clinician, and again, I'm reiterating the reason I'm saying this, as a clinician, for me, who has read the research, met the researcher who carries out a lot of this research and analyzes it, will say the tools are effective to a degree, but they don't really tell us the whole picture. It's a snapshot in time when we take it. But I can say to you, do that in depression or anxiety inventory and rate how you feel right now. How happy, joyous, or excited do you feel, or how miserable, anxious, and depressed do you feel? And then in 6 weeks' time, after we've done some work together, you can use the same tool. And so what we can see, what we call time points. Point A, when we first asked it, when we first saw you. Point B is 3 to 6 weeks in, and there should be a point C, really, is like towards the end of the session. But it's notoriously difficult to do the last one. And what we saw in the research that was 50% of the people who go for the most researched therapeutic approach, and it's only regarded as gold standard because it's the most researched. It's not evidence, it's gold standard. Improve 50% out of 100. So although we could argue about those stats to start with, and we could argue about the type of approach used and who's doing the work and who the clinicians are and all of that kind of thing, the micro detail. But the point in this case is that client is investing time and energy wondering whether or not that person has changed or they're just doing it on purpose. And I said, so while you invest that time and energy, you take the energy off yourself. And then what happens is you go through the disappointed cycle. You end up on the sofa or in your bedroom, locking yourself away, feeling incredibly depressed and disappointed because you can't take it, because you're not resilient to that situation because it's gone on for so long. And you get stuck. And then you don't pursue any of the things that you could be pursuing that you've worked hard for. So wouldn't it be better to just say, is there any point trying to figure that out and become more able to be you? So if you want to give feedback and say, hey, actually, I think if we could look at it this way, this is my perspective. And sometimes not, and sometimes don't say anything, because if the clinical guidelines show time and time again that only 50% of people change in what's considered gold standard therapeutic approaches. And no, it won't work with everyone. And many narcissists, many clinicians say, no, you can't do anything to change the way a narcissist is. I'm not suggesting a mum goes into therapy. And I would suggest that if she went into therapy, it'd be more along the lines of how Gabor Mate talks about trauma. But that's not for my client to work out. She's an adult now, and her methods aren't working, serving her. So how can she survive the environment she's in and disinvest and not feed the energy that has been keeping this dynamic alive. If we as clinicians aren't even impacting the general population who are worried who are struggling, who've got wellbeing issues, and with no real evidence, longitudinal studies as to whether or not they were able to maintain the shifts and changes that they made. Because if I look at my own journey, although I'm a stubborn Tory and I take a bit longer to process and do things, it's taken me from that first decision of when I had my son over 30 years ago to get to the point in which the opposite is almost occurred. Rather than being depressed and anxious 5 days a week and only feeling good about myself after going to the gym and all of that kind of stuff, to feeling peace and joy and excitement, no, peace, joy, and satisfaction most of the time. There's a 30-year window in between the two. And there are challenges and experiences I've had along the way that have made it incredibly difficult to get through, for various reasons that I might talk about on other podcasts. So if you listen to this, I'm going to put time points in, because what I've covered in this final minute is the first part. I covered the oracle cards, and the cards that came up were listening, spirit of place, and peak and joy. And that was in the first section of tonight's recording. And on the second section, I started looking at where I was at in having that conversation around wanting to create a soul-led life, and then really struggling with this challenge of why am I questioning why it's okay to just relax and watch the birds and take videos of hens. And I'm even posting them on my site because maybe someone else will enjoy them, That's about me being in that spirit of place, of being more authentic. And then 20 minutes in, I start looking at what an ordinary, simple life might look like. And often we don't necessarily think about that until we're in our 50s and 60s. And it can look ordinary, but it can be extraordinary as well. And then I look at the value of that. And then, the grief in releasing ourselves of old identities, and the old identities to the roles and the importance that we gave those roles, or that phase of life we were going through, like with the camper van. And then questioning the deeper mechanism of life, which is the existential angst that can come along with that. And, going into a space where you feel existential angst about who am I, what's the point to existence, why am I here, where am I going next, is a very tough place to be in. So you don't just want to listen to people who are melancholic about their experience. You probably want to be able to learn how to trust and dive into your own experience, and maybe even get some guidance so that you don't get stuck there or drown in those feelings. And finally, I looked at how we invest in things that are very difficult to measure, whether or not we're getting the results that we want, from a clinician who certainly for the last 20 years used measuring tools. We've measured autism, ASD, anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicide ideation. Oh my God, I've just used that word, I've just realised on here. And the point is wherever you are on that continuum, we can go through moments. Feelings are transitionary and we will face challenges. But if you're stuck and in a place where it's hard to articulate what's going on and you don't know where you're going, and you're starting to feel purposeless and hopeless and the meaninglessness, it's okay to feel like that occasionally, but that's when it's time to seek some support and get some help. Whether that's through your doctor or psychiatrist, depends on what country you're in, what license, different licenses that people have. Anyway, I'm going to pull a card, I think, because I need to shift the energy now into this. And I wanted to use the Good Tarot, which again is Colette Baron Reid. And I'm just making a log. It's 1 hour and 4 minutes in. So an hour seems to be the max before my brain starts shutting down. So if you're watching this um, recording, then welcome. So I'm going to pull the final card from the Good Tarot deck. So this is a different way of using tarot to see what we get. Oh, and we get the World. Right, so as in the other oracle, I'm going to show you. Where does the World come up? It's not the Fool, High Priestess. Oh, it's on there, 21. Oh yeah, it's the final. Oh my goodness. Perspective. Yeah, okay. So in this deck, it it talks about the world in the way that the tarot talks about, but a slightly different angle. So in this deck, the world is about perspective. So you can see the different planets there. Is that the sun? Oh, there's a key. Oh, interesting. I've just seen the lock. I haven't seen the key. I saw the lock. I'm being called to shift my perspective on my life now. When I remember, I am first and foremost an immortal soul, experiencing life as a human being. I have no fear. I can see clearly that I am a powerful co creator in a divine partnership with Spirit. Aligning myself with Spirit, remaining unattached to outcomes, I am a conduit for miracles. So, this may be your message, but I can certainly resonate with that. So, you're a conduit. When you get into the place and you're more comfortable with the uncertain and the unknown, you can become a conduit to start having experiences that are well beyond anything that you could have perceived, as I've experienced in some cases. So I hope you enjoyed the session, whether it's through the recording or not. And I'm going to put the time points underneath so you can see that I spent some time talking about the oracle cards and some time talking about travel, creating a soul led life, and how I sometimes help my clients to shift their perspective of what is possible so that they can, I was going to say unattached, that's not a word, is it? So they can release themselves from these patterns that are keeping them stuck in these dynamics, because sometimes that's all it takes to make a shift. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to doing another live soon.